From the very first moment, it was a tragedy waiting to happen. The final bell rang not in the ring, but far too early, with a suddenness that left the entire world of boxing shaken. For a man who had spent his entire life fighting, it was a quiet, unexpected end. To understand the story of Marvelous Marvin Hagler is to understand a life built on struggle, a career defined by an unbreakable will, and a legacy forever marked by the ultimate price he paid. This is the making of a champion, and the heartbreaking path that led to his final, unseen fight. Marvin Hagler's story began on May 23, 1954, in Newark, New Jersey, a place that would quickly force him to grow up. The city was a powder keg, and Marvin's childhood was spent in the thick of it. He lived in a neighborhood steeped in poverty and danger, where violence was a daily reality. This wasn't a world of choices, it was a world of survival. For a young, shy kid, every day was a lesson in how to be tough enough to protect himself and his family. The streets were his first training ground, teaching him to be constantly aware, constantly ready. The tipping point came in 1967. Marvin was just 12 years old when the Newark riots erupted. For 6 days, the city was a war zone. Violent clashes between police and the black community, fueled by years of mistreatment, turned the streets into a blaze of fire and chaos. Marvin's family, having seen enough, packed up what little they had and left. They moved to Brockton, Massachusetts, hoping to escape the violence and find a chance at a new, peaceful life. At first, Brockton wasn't much easier. Marvin was still the quiet kid, an outsider looking for a place to belong. But it was there, in a local gym, that he found his calling. He stumbled upon a boxing gym run by two brothers, Goody and Pat Petronelli. They immediately saw something in him that no one else had, a raw, untapped fire. Marvin wasn't a talker, he was a worker. He trained with an obsessive dedication that quickly set him apart. He wasn't just interested in the sport, he was consumed by it. He once famously said that if you were to cut open his bald head, you'd find a glove because that's all he was. He lived and breathed boxing. The Petronelli brothers didn't just teach him how to throw punches. They taught him discipline, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to believe in his own ability. Under their guidance, Marvin transformed. He became physically stronger, developing a unique southpaw stance that confused his opponents. He also built what would become his most famous asset, a chin so tough that he could absorb brutal punishment without faltering. But as Marvin built himself into a fighter, he was unknowingly preparing for a fight far bigger than any opponent in the ring. The system itself was waiting for him, and it was a fight he was about to begin. Rightful Chapter 2. From the moment he went pro in 1973, Marvin Hagler was a problem. He wasn't just good, he was terrifying. In his debut, he knocked out Terry Ryan in the second round, showing a raw power that made an immediate statement. He kept winning, and with each victory, a quiet dread began to spread throughout the middleweight division. The problem for Marvin wasn't his skill, it was his danger. Promoters and big-name fighters saw him as a high-risk, low-reward opponent. He was too good to be an easy win, but he wasn't yet a star who could sell tickets and bring in big money. So, they did what they always do to the ones they fear. They blacklisted him. Marvin was stuck in a boxing purgatory. The politics of the sport kept him from the opportunities he deserved. While other fighters with flashier personalities got a fast track to the top, Marvin was left on the undercards. He was ignored by major promoters and avoided by top contenders who were too afraid of losing to an unknown powerhouse. But Marvin didn't complain. He didn't quit. He took on any fight anywhere, often traveling to hostile cities to prove himself in small venues. He fought with the discipline of a soldier and the chip on his shoulder of a man who knew he was being wronged. It was his way of saying, "I'll fight anybody, anywhere, anytime." This refusal to back down built his legend, but it was a long, painful road. Finally, after years of being denied, he got his first real shot at the world titles in 1979 against champion Vito Antuofermo. Marvin fought the fight of his life, dominating the champion for 15 rounds. Everyone in the arena and watching at home knew he had won. He landed more punches, controlled the ring, and showed the world what a force he was. But the judges saw it differently. They scored the fight a draw. The decision was a slap in the face, a symbol of the unfairness he had been fighting his entire career. The system had held him back from the bottom, and now it was stealing a title from him at the very top. The disrespect was palpable, but what happened next would prove that you can't keep a warrior down for long. Rightful Chapter 3. He'd been cheated once. He wasn't going to let it happen again. Less than a year after the controversial draw, Marvin Hagler was back, this time traveling to London to face Alan Minter for the very titles that had been kept from him. The atmosphere in Wembley Arena was electric, hostile, and completely focused on the British champion. But Marvin was beyond fear. He was fueled by years of pent-up anger and disrespect. In his mind, this wasn't just a boxing match. It was a chance to finally silence his critics and claim what was rightfully his. He promised his team he was bringing his own 2 judges with him, his fists. When the bell rang, Marvin exploded. He tore into Minter with a relentless barrage of punches, cutting him badly in the first round. The fight was a clinic in controlled aggression. Marvin didn't just beat Minter, he dismantled him. The champion's face became a mask of blood as Hagler's fists found their mark again and again. In the third round, with Minter barely able to see, the referee was forced to stop the fight. Marvin Hagler was finally the undisputed middleweight champion of the world. But his moment of triumph was immediately stolen. As Marvin knelt in the ring, celebrating a victory he had fought his entire life for, bottles and debris rained down from the angry crowd. His team had to form a human shield and rush him out of the ring for his safety. There was no victory speech, no raising of the championship belts, just chaos. The disrespect that had followed him his entire career had reached its most painful and literal point. His greatest moment was tainted by the ugly bitterness of others. The experience solidified his resolve. From then on, Hagler didn't just fight for wins, he fought to command respect. He would go on to defend his titles 12 times, often dominating his opponents with a brutal, single-minded focus. The media might not have given him the credit he was due, but in the ring, he left no doubt. His determination was so intense that when a ring announcer in 1982 left off his nickname, Marvelous, Marvin went to court and legally changed his name to Marvelous Marvin Hagler. It wasn't about ego, it was a non-negotiable demand for the recognition he had earned. He had become a king in his division, but even among boxing's other legends, he was still an outsider fighting to belong. And that battle was about to get even more personal. Rightful Chapter 4. By the 1980s, boxing had entered its most exciting and dangerous era. At the center of it all were 4 legendary fighters who became known as the Four Kings: Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hitman Hearns, and Roberto Hands of Stone Duran. Together, they created a golden age for the sport, fighting each other with a frequency and ferocity rarely seen today. But even in this royal court, Marvin was always the outsider. While Leonard, Hearns, and Duran all enjoyed early fame, media attention, and powerful promoters, Hagler had none of that. The others were groomed for stardom, smiling on magazine covers and landing lucrative endorsement deals. Hagler's path, by contrast, was a lonely one, forged in a small gym in Brockton, Massachusetts, with only his deep-seated hunger and a pair of dedicated trainers. He had to fight for every inch of respect, battling dangerous opponents in small venues just to get noticed. His career wasn't built on a spotlight, it was built on a foundation of struggle. This double standard fueled him. Marvin carried that chip on his shoulder into every fight, turning every punch into a personal statement. He wasn't just fighting for titles, he was fighting to be seen as an equal. When he stepped into the ring, he wasn't just facing an opponent, he was facing every promoter who ignored him, every journalist who overlooked him, and every fighter who tried to avoid him. When he faced Duran in 1983, it was a showcase of his grit and intelligence. The fight wasn't a knockout war, it was a grueling, 15-round chess match against one of the sport's craftiest veterans. Hagler proved he was more than a brawler, outthinking and outlasting the legendary Duran to win a unanimous decision. It was a victory that should have cemented his place among the greats, but even that masterful performance was often overshadowed by his more violent knockouts. The media didn't see the genius of a technical war, they wanted the carnage of a brawl. But a brawl was exactly what he was about to give them. A fight so short, so brutal, and so unforgettable that it would finally force the world to pay attention. Rightful Chapter 5. He fought his entire life for this moment. On April 15, 1985, Marvin Hagler and Thomas Hitman Hearns stepped into the ring at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas for a fight that would forever be known as The War. The build-up had been tense, a 23-city press tour where mutual respect had slowly curdled into genuine hatred. By the time they met, both men were ready to tear each other apart. When the opening bell rang, the crowd expected a feeling-out process, a tactical first round. They got a tornado. From the very first second, Hearns unleashed a powerful right hand, a shot that would have leveled almost any other fighter in history. It landed flush on Hagler's chin, a punch of pure, raw power. But Marvin didn't just absorb it, he kept walking forward, as if he'd been hit with a pillow. The look on Hearns' face was one of pure shock. He had thrown his best shot, and it had done nothing. It was in that moment that everyone realized this wasn't going to be a boxing match, it was going to be a collision. For the next 3 rounds, the world watched in disbelief as 2 of boxing's greatest warriors engaged in a non-stop, brutal dance of violence. There was no defense, no strategy, just 2 men standing in the center of the ring, trading bombs with everything they had. Punches that would have ended other fights were thrown and answered without a single step back. But in the second round, a new horror emerged. A vicious cut opened above Hagler's right eye, and blood began to pour down his face. The referee stopped the fight to have the doctor check the cut, and in that moment, Marvin was gripped by his greatest fear, that the fight would be stopped because of an injury and not a knockout. He saw his legacy, his one chance for undeniable greatness, slipping away. When the doctor allowed the fight to continue, Hagler came out like a man possessed. Ignoring the river of blood streaming down his face, he lunged at Hearns with a fury that bordered on rage. He cornered his opponent, unleashing a powerful right hand that sent the hitman to the canvas. Hearns tried to get up, but his legs were gone. The referee waved off the fight. It was over. Hagler had won by knockout in the 3rd round. It was a victory forged in blood and pure will, a moment that cemented him as one of the toughest fighters who ever lived. He had finally gotten the spotlight he deserved, but the celebration was short-lived because the most painful moment of his career was just around the corner. A moment that would break his heart and force him to leave it all behind. Rightful Chapter 6. In 1987, Marvin Hagler finally got the fight he'd wanted for years. He stepped into the ring to face Sugar Ray Leonard, the last of the 4 kings he had yet to defeat. Leonard had been retired for nearly 3 years, but the media and promoters saw a chance to create the ultimate spectacle. For Hagler, this was more than a fight. It was a chance to put a final, undeniable stamp on his legacy. A win over Leonard would silence every critic and prove, once and for all, who the best truly was. The fight itself was a clash of styles. Hagler, the relentless pressure fighter, moved forward constantly, landing the heavier, more damaging punches. Leonard, the master boxer, used his speed and footwork to stay on the outside, throwing quick combinations and flashy flurries at the end of rounds to catch the judges' eyes. Hagler stalked and Leonard danced. Marvin controlled the pace and landed the impactful shots, but Leonard was the one making the flashiest moves. When the final bell rang after 12 hard-fought rounds, the world knew it was close. But most in the boxing community felt Hagler had done enough. He was the aggressor, he had controlled the ring, and he had landed the more meaningful blows. The decision, however, was in the hands of 3 judges, and that's when the heartbreak began. The verdict was a split decision victory for Sugar Ray Leonard. The boxing world erupted in controversy. Many cried foul, calling it one of the biggest robberies in the sport's history. It felt like an old, painful pattern was repeating itself. Hagler had fought for years to overcome the system, and now he believed it had stolen his victory from him on the biggest stage of all. For Marvin Hagler, the loss wasn't just a defeat, it was a betrayal. He felt that the decision was a predetermined outcome, a victory handed to the charismatic media darling while the true warrior was left with nothing. He didn't scream for a rematch or demand an investigation. He simply walked away. At 32 years old, still in his prime, Marvelous Marvin Hagler retired from the sport he had dominated. His final, heart-wrenching words on the subject were, "Tell Ray to get a life." He never fought again. The greatest middleweight of his era left boxing not because he was beaten, but because his faith in the sport was broken. He lived out the rest of his life quietly in New Hampshire, far from the spotlight he had never truly wanted. Then, on March 13, 2021, the final, shocking chapter came to a close. With no warning, no illness, no long battle, Marvin Hagler passed away suddenly at the age of 66. The final bell had rung, and no one saw it coming. The tragic end to a champion who fought his way out of poverty, against a rigged system, and through the bloodiest nights in boxing history, was a quiet, unexpected fade to black. The fighter who had demanded respect his entire life received it in a final, heartbreaking outpouring of tributes from the world that had so often overlooked him. He never lost his fighting spirit. He simply lost his faith in the system. And in the end, that was a loss he couldn't come back from.